Imagine a world where money is not simply a means to acquire goods, but a vibrant force that connects our actions to the vast spiritual universe. In the pages of this text, we embark on a mysterious and profound journey toward understanding how finance and spirituality intertwine, revealing the true nature of human economy from a cosmic perspective. Rudolf Steiner, visionary and philosopher of spiritual science, invites us to explore beyond material conventions, offering a unique and enlightening perspective on how karma, the universal law of cause and effect, shapes not only our lives but also our relationship with money. In The Gold of the Soul, Money and Karma, we discover that true gold is not found in coins or bills, but in pure intentions and a deep connection with our spiritual essence. Economy, in its purest form, is a reflection of the energy that flows between the human soul and the cosmos. Steiner challenges us to reconsider our most ingrained beliefs about wealth, inviting us to reflect on the spiritual purpose behind our daily transactions. Through his words, we embark on a revealing journey where the laws of karma and spiritual forces merge with everyday economic practices, unveiling a path to true inner and collective prosperity. This is not just a text about money, it is a guide to transform our material life into an expression of the highest spirituality. The Gold of the Soul promises us a renewed and deeply transformative understanding of what it truly means to be prosperous. Prepare to open your mind and heart to a new vision. The spiritual economy of mankind is waiting to be discovered, and you, as a reader, will be the first step in this fascinating journey toward true wealth. In these times, when the human soul finds itself increasingly entangled in the threads of materiality, it becomes indispensable to lift our gaze towards the spiritual depths of those elements that, though seemingly mundane, carry within themselves great significance in the cosmic drama of evolution. Among all of them, the most misunderstood and yet the most active in shaping human destiny is money. Modern thought, entirely absorbed in mechanical and utilitarian categories, has reduced money to a mere means of exchange, a unit of measurement or an instrument of power. This perspective, born from an intellect disconnected from the spiritual world, is incapable of penetrating the hidden mystery behind the economic phenomenon. For money is not merely a human invention, nor is it a neutral structure serving social needs. Money is a terrestrial reflection of spiritual realities that have descended into the denser planes of existence with a hidden and profound purpose. What we today call economy is nothing more than the visible manifestation of great etheric and soul currents that circulate among human beings as currents of life, currents that are mistakenly interpreted as mere flows of goods or capital. But in truth, what flows in every transaction, every debt, every possession or lack is karma, and it cannot be understood without knowledge of the spiritual world that sustains it. Every material possession is tied to the consequences of actions performed in previous existences. It is not luck, cunning, or sheer willpower alone that determines a human being's economic condition, but the deep moral logic that governs destinies from higher spheres. In this sense, money is a karmic agent of the highest order. It returns, it demands, it rewards, and it teaches. And the soul that gains or loses it must ask not about external causes, but about the inner lessons offered by cosmic wisdom. Those who have learned to see with the eyes of the spirit know that gold, so pursued and so feared, is nothing but a symbol. Physical gold is connected to ancient solar forces, and its magnetism comes from essences that in other times belonged to the mysteries. The noble metal was not originally intended for accumulation, but for preservation, ritual use, and sacred acts. When it was separated from the temple and led into the marketplace, the human soul began to experience an increasing spiritual dissonance that continues to deepen even today. Yet this descent was necessary. Just as the spirit must incarnate in matter to recognize itself and rise again, so too did the principle of value need to experience a fall so that the human being, freely and consciously, could redeem it from the depths of their being. For evolution demands freedom, and there is no freedom without error, without temptation, without the abyss. Money has darkened precisely so that the soul, in its confrontation with it, may develop discernment, moral will, and higher understanding. Many, ignoring the spiritual essence of money, have sought to reject it as impure. Others have embraced it as the ultimate goal of existence. Both paths are deviations, for money, like everything in this world, is good or evil according to the consciousness that moves it. There is no intrinsic evil in it, but neither is there automatic goodness. It is a test, and whoever administers it administers a fragment of their own destiny. In this work, I aim to offer an elevated, non-speculative vision of the economic phenomenon. I am not interested in accounting categories or institutional structures, but in the hidden impulses that sustain them. We will analyze money not as currency, but as the structure of the social soul. We will study its connection with the Luciferic and arimanic forces that seek to dominate man from the extremes. We will examine how souls attract or repel money according to their level of moral evolution, and how poverty and wealth are not merely material conditions, but signs of a vast spiritual biography. To those who have had the courage to delve into my studies on the constitution of the human being, planetary evolution, and the spiritual worlds, I announce that here they will find a concrete application of such teachings. This writing is not directed at the curious or the skeptic, but at the disciple of higher knowledge, the servant of truth, the builder of the new spiritual culture that is to flourish in the coming centuries. Whoever is able to comprehend the intimate relationship between money and karma, between the soul and exchange, between spirit and economy, will not only transform their understanding of the world, but also transform themselves. For the mystery of money is also the mystery of the self, of its value, its freedom, and its destiny. May this study serve, then, not to criticize the present world, but to offer light. For just as gold shines in the darkness of the rock, so too, in the midst of this materialistic era, can moral thought be born, the economy of the soul, and the fraternity that is to come. And truly I say to you, until money is understood in its spiritual essence, humanity will not achieve the harmony of its social organism. Let those who have ears to hear listen. Let those who have the will to understand go deeper. And let those who have the courage to transform their economic life into a spiritual act take the first step with reverence, for the threshold has been drawn. Money and Karma, the Spiritual Economy of the Human Being, by Rudolf Steiner. At the end, there is an unrelated note about YouTube subscriptions, which I have not included since it does not belong to the original discourse. Let me know if you want that part translated as well. Chapter 1. The Spiritual Genealogy of Money. From Sacrifice to Symbol. In the dawn of humanity, when thought had not yet separated from the forces of the soul and the soul lived immersed in the cosmic totality, economic acts did not exist. Giving and receiving were not transactional actions, but emanations of the soul in harmony with divine forces. That which would later become property, exchange value, and accumulation was, in those remote times, still a sacrament, a sacred act whose purpose was not to obtain, but to consecrate. Long before gold shone in the hands of the powerful, and before coins were sealed with the faces of kings to dictate the course of human will, there existed an economy of the invisible, a circulation of life in which the object given carried the spiritual intention of the one who offered it. At that time, offering was the axis of all social dynamics. There was no commerce, only sacrifice. This sacrifice must not be understood in terms of loss or suffering, but as an act of consecration. The human being did not give out of necessity or convenience, but out of reverence. Every act of giving was a detachment from oneself, a way of participating in the higher order. In the earliest cultures, the offering of goods, fruits, animals, fire, songs, or weavings to the gods or to fellow humans was not a symbol of poverty or wealth, but an act of creation, a way of collaborating with the harmony of the cosmos. This sacred principle of giving was guarded for millennia by the ancient mystery schools, which saw in exchange an opportunity to elevate man above instinctual selfishness. The initiates knew that in every act of offering, if it was infused with awareness and pure will, the soul was tempered, shaped, and strengthened, for true value was not in the object offered, but in the inner impulse that moved it. However, with the progressive individualization of the human being, with his necessary emancipation from spiritual hierarchies and his descent into matter, that sacred economy began to transform. What was once sacrifice became tribute, what was once tribute became exchange, and exchange, stripped of its spiritual foundation, turned into commerce, a network no longer uniting hearts but interests. Thus money was born as a dead symbol of a living reality, a mineral echo of a solar impulse. The first forms of money, shells, metals, precious stones, still retained something of their original sacredness. It was not indifferent what was used as a means of exchange. Each object possessed an animic quality. Gold, for example, was a carrier of solar vibrations, and its use as an element of value was not arbitrary. Gold contains within itself the imprint of the solar logos, the shaping force of the higher self. The human soul unconsciously recognized that vibration. But as time passed, even this perception became veiled. Money became an abstraction, a symbol devoid of spiritual content, a numerical quantity disconnected from higher realms. The coin was replaced by the banknote. The banknote was replaced by credit. Credit was replaced by speculation. And thus the symbol drifted away from its origin like a river evaporating in the desert. Yet in the spiritual worlds there is no forgetfulness. Every visible evolution is accompanied by an invisible counterpart. The genealogy of money has not been interrupted. It has only become secret. Even today, when a human being gives with awareness, when they pay a debt with pure will, or when they receive with gratitude, free from greed or fear, an invisible bridge is restored between symbol and sacrifice. Those with suprasensible vision can observe how every coin, every banknote, every number in an accounting ledger drags behind it a column of moral forces, past intentions, and hidden commitments. For money in its external form is nothing, but as a karmic trace it is everything. It is the memory of the soul, the embodied judgment, the invisible inheritance. The spirit of our time, so dominated by cold intellectualism and mechanical calculation, has sought to convince man that money is neutral. This illusion is dangerous, for nothing that circulates among men is devoid of animic content. Money in every era has been shaped by collective consciousness, by the thoughts, desires, and fears that surround it. Its external form may remain the same, but its etheric substance varies according to the level of consciousness of those who use it. For this reason, we must understand that a nation's economic network is not merely a web of transactions, but a living spiritual structure where individual and collective karma intertwines invisibly. Whoever accumulates wealth without understanding builds around themselves a wall of dark glass that separates them from the spiritual world. But whoever gives with awareness and receives with humility transforms their economy into an initiatory art. The future of humanity will largely depend on whether we can restore money to its original function, to be a vehicle of conscious love, of active fraternity, and of spiritual service. It is not about destroying the symbol, but about purifying it, reconsecrating it. For where money becomes an expression of the higher self and not of the lower self, economy will become a temple. And in that temple, still invisible, still under construction, the spirit of sacrifice will manifest once again, but not as an offering of blood, nor as painful renunciation, but as the free act of a mature soul that recognizes in each coin not a tool of power, but a spark of destiny. Then and only then will the spiritual genealogy of money be revealed in all its majesty, not as a history of human errors, but as a sacred drama, a fall and redemption, a forgetting and remembering of symbol and truth. Chapter 2. The hidden double of money. Luciferic and arimanic forces in the economy. Whoever observes the world with a truly spiritual gaze is not deceived by appearances. They know that in everything the human being touches, whether thought, action, or institution, there are hidden forces interwoven behind the veil of matter. Nothing is truly neutral, least of all in the realms where money circulates, for spiritual powers find in it a fertile field to act, to tempt, to shape. By its very nature, money is neither evil nor good. Its moral character depends on the soul that wields it. But precisely because of its ability to crystallize desires, intensify wills, and mediate between people, it has become one of the most sensitive instruments to the influence of the two great adversarial currents of human evolution, the Luciferic and arimanic forces. Lucifer, whose primary impulse is to elevate man prematurely, tempts the soul with absolutes. Then the soul begins to idolize abstract value, disconnecting itself from earthly realities, believing that economic power is proof of its intrinsic superiority. Luciferic forces act especially on those who see money as a path to individual redemption, a road to illusory independence, a way to separate themselves from the world and believe themselves above social laws. This impulse leads to the spiritual idealization of money, to the emergence of doctrines that falsely mix esotericism with personal enrichment, to the belief that abundance is a sign of enlightenment. Lucifer seduces the soul with gold as a crown, not as a tool. On the other hand, Ahriman, the cold entity of mechanical intellect and soulless calculation, infiltrates money when it is reduced to a mere number, a statistic, a system. Ahriman manifests in financial bureaucracy, in ruthless speculation, in the invisible rule of numbers over human destiny. Where Lucifer spiritualizes money excessively, Ahriman materializes it absolutely. Where Lucifer's influence is visible, present in those who wield economic power as a divine right, Ahriman acts in the impersonal machinery of financial decisions. Where no one takes responsibility with their conscience, where everything is dictated by heartless algorithms. Between these two extremes, between money turned into a solar idol by Lucifer and money transformed into dead matter by Ahriman, the human being stands, obscured on both sides, tempted at every step, unaware of the origin of their impulses. The soul that hoards money out of fear for the future, out of a need for control, out of a thirst for dominance is caught in Ahriman's web. The soul that believes wealth makes it special, chosen, spiritually superior, is under Lucifer's spell. Both currents lead to the same abyss, the loss of the true self, the disruption of balance, and the inability to fulfill the spiritual destiny of free fraternity. It is no coincidence that, in the ancient schools of wisdom, disciples were forbidden to handle money until they had reached a certain degree of inner purification. For money, being the vessel of concentrated human energies, is extremely sensitive to the influence of evil. Its irresponsible use, its accumulation without a higher purpose, its mechanical circulation, generate dark etheric forms that cling to the astral bodies of those who handle it, deforming their destiny, weakening their will. However, it is not enough to denounce these influences. It is necessary to understand their role within the evolutionary process. Both Lucifer and Ahriman are in truth terrible educators. They allow the human being to know error through experience, so that later, when the soul has been sufficiently torn apart, it may begin to long for the just middle. The just middle. In this just middle, money is neither rejected nor worshipped nor feared. It is consciously transformed into an instrument of evolution. This middle path can only be walked by those who have developed moral thinking, free will, and spiritual imagination. Whoever understands that every coin, every economic decision, every bank transaction is, in reality, an action of the soul, a gesture of the inner being, begins to recover the thread that connects them to the spiritual world, even in the densest realms. On this path, money ceases to be an autonomous energy and returns to what it once was in the mysteries, a direct extension of conscious will. For this, the human being must learn to observe themselves with extreme lucidity. What lies behind their desire for wealth? What emotions dominate them when they gain or lose money? What images arise in their soul when they think of value? These questions are not philosophical, they are practical, for within each of them lies a choice, to be a vehicle of the spirit or a puppet of the adversarial powers. The future of money. In the times to come, humanity must build an economy in which the forces of Lucifer and Ahriman no longer rule from the shadows, but are recognized, redeemed, and transcended. Only then can a truly human economic life emerge, where money flows not as a reflection of greed or calculation, but as an expression of the morally awakened soul, as a sign of active fraternity. That day will come, but only when each human being, starting from their own center, begins to watch over the hidden double of money, for there will be no true social transformation without a revolution in the soul, and that revolution begins where gold is no longer an object of desire or fear, but a symbol of the self that has learned to give, to receive, and to transform, under the light of its inner freedom. Chapter 3. The Karma of Wealth. Inheritance, Destiny, and Spiritual Debt. To one who contemplates life only through the eyes of the body, wealth may seem like a phenomenon tied to effort, cunning, or the whims of fortune. Some appear surrounded by abundance, while others struggle ceaselessly just to survive. Material differences are so evident that they have always generated tensions, resentments, struggles, and complex social structures. But for the one who has learned to observe the course of human life from the spiritual worlds, appearances give way to deeper causes, revealing a vaster, older, and more demanding truth. Wealth is a visible manifestation of invisible karma. Nothing in a person's economic destiny is separate from their soul's history. Every inherited fortune, persistent lack, or unexpected gain is part of a spiritual pattern extending beyond a single lifetime. The human soul, when incarnating in the physical world, does not arrive as a blank slate. It carries tendencies, impulses, debts, and merits that will shape, in part, the configuration of its earthly life. The economic status into which one is born or attains is merely one of many scenarios designed for learning. The karmic roots of wealth and poverty. Some are born into great material wealth, but this should not be interpreted as a moral blessing. Often such fortune is the result of past actions, where the person cultivated generosity, service, and prudence. In these cases, the current life offers a fertile field to continue this task from a different position. However, wealth may also arise from unpurified desires, from unfinished ambitions, and thus it appears now as a dangerous trial, a mirror that forces the soul to decide, will it redeem what was darkened, or will it sink deeper into the illusion of power and possession? Likewise, poverty has multiple karmic causes. It may be a school of humility, a call to inwardness, a protection against material distractions, but it can also be the result of past negligence, old selfishness, or violations of the law of reciprocity. In all cases, however, the key is not to judge from the outside, but rather to ask, what hidden task does this economic condition present to the soul? For every financial situation, whether of abundance or scarcity, carries a spiritual responsibility. Those who possess must learn to manage, to discern, to share. Those who lack must learn to trust, to overcome despair, to discover their worth beyond possessions. Both positions are opportunities for evolution. Both are demands of destiny. The moral weight of wealth. Wealth cannot be understood as a neutral good. Every coin received carries a moral weight, an echo of past decisions and a question for the future. What will you do with it? Will you use it to strengthen your ego or to serve the world? Will you transform it into pride or into compassion, into fear or into freedom? Inherited wealth, in particular, is one of the most complex trials a soul can face, for it not only involves managing resources that were not directly earned, but also receiving collective karmic impulses, family, even national, embedded within those assets. There is no inheritance without spiritual debt. Whoever receives wealth also receives the task of purifying the soul currents associated with it. If they fail to do so, if they surrender to the inertia of privilege, they risk locking themselves in an invisible prison, separating themselves from the world and from their true mission. For the question is not about having or not having, but rather, who are you in relation to what you possess? Beyond material possession. There are souls incarnated in extreme poverty who radiate an inner light no fortune can buy, and there are the wealthy, wrapped in luxury yet drowning in spiritual misery. This paradox should not lead to contempt for wealth, but rather to a deep understanding of it, as a symbol of the soul's state. The collective karma of wealth. Spiritual debt is not limited to the personal level. There are also family and communal karmas. The misuse of money in one generation can have visible or invisible consequences for the next. Children inherit not only land or houses, but also the shadows of selfishness, abuse, or injustice, imprinted by their ancestors on the moral substance of money. Just as there are luminous inheritances that allow new generations to act as bearers of material blessings, there are also fortunes that carry the weight of dishonor, of what must be transformed to prevent the repetition of past errors. The soul's choice. Every personal economy is intertwined with a vaster spiritual structure. What one gains or loses affects not only their own biography, but also the spiritual economy of the world. Money is not static, it circulates, and with it, intentions, emotions, and thoughts also circulate. Whoever uses their resources with awareness makes them carriers of light. Whoever uses them with fear or greed makes them conduits of dark forces. Thus, every economic decision is also a moral choice, a seed that will bloom in the field of destiny. The soul's pre-incarnational choice. There are times when a soul, before incarnating, chooses voluntarily to be born into economic hardship, not as punishment, but as an act of service, to experience lack, to understand others, to develop compassion, to temper the will. Likewise, there are those who accept the burden of wealth, not as a privilege, but as a mission, to sustain great works, to open new paths, to be guardians of resources the world does not yet know how to manage. Wealth as a spiritual trial. Thus, wealth should neither be anxiously pursued nor feared with prejudice. It must be recognized as a spiritual scenario, a form taken by karma to teach, to liberate, or to test. Only when the soul grasps this truth does it begin to see money not as an end or as a means, but as a symbol of its own inner state. Then abundance ceases to be a source of pride or guilt, and poverty ceases to be shame or punishment. Both become earthly translations of the divine will, which impels the soul toward its fulfillment. For in the end, it is not the gold that matters, but the temple of the soul that holds it, not the bank account, but the account of the heart, not the fortune, but the moral strength. The karma of wealth is ultimately a call to awaken, to remember that true value cannot be counted or stored, but only lived, through conscious giving and inner transformation. And only the one who answers this call with humility and courage will one day be able to say that they have made of money not a burden, but an instrument of the spirit. Chapter 4. Biography and Money. The soul as an economist of its own evolution. When human life is viewed from a terrestrial perspective, it appears as a succession of years, events, relationships, losses, lessons, and forgetfulness. But one who has learned to read in the great book of existence is not content with the mere chronology of external events. He knows that behind every visible fact lies a spiritual intention, and that the biography of a human being is not just a simple sequence of episodes, but a living organism, expressing in each of its developments the soul's evolving plan. Within this biography, money appears not only as a factor affecting external life conditions, but also as an active participant in the architecture of destiny. Money is not an accidental circumstance, but a form the soul itself has placed along its path to cultivate certain inner strengths. Just as the physical body allows the eye to exercise will and perception, money acts as an instrument of relationship, a test, and a vehicle for moral transformation. There is no economic situation in life that is placed there without meaning. Before incarnating, the soul contemplates its developmental needs, the forces it must purify, and the capacities it must awaken. With wisdom, it designs an existence where money, whether in abundance or scarcity, becomes a silent teacher. This teacher does not speak with words, but manifests in every daily decision, in accepting a job, receiving payment, losing a possession, or sustaining a project. And what it teaches is not merely economics, but self-knowledge. Just as a sculptor works on stone to reveal the hidden figure within, the soul works with money in life to liberate the true I, to test its inner freedom, and to measure its fidelity to its essential purpose. This is why money cannot be thought of as something external to biography. It is part of it. It is woven into significant events, major turning points, and crucial decisions. Often it becomes the mirror in which the soul discovers who it has been and who it wishes to become. Through money, the soul constantly faces moral dilemmas. Will it accept that financial help? Will it forego an opportunity to remain true to its values? Will it share its resources with those in need? Will it fall into the temptation of easy profit, or will it persevere on its path despite scarcity? Each of these questions not only shapes the present, but also molds the karmic body of the future. Everything the soul does with money, it does to itself. Every economic act is, in truth, an intervention in the soul's inner economy. Thus, one cannot speak of spiritual evolution without also considering how one has lived their relationship with money. Some may have attained high knowledge, but have not purified their inner economy, and therefore their knowledge does not become a transforming force, but remains mere adornment of thought. Others, without great conceptual understanding, have lived a life of profound financial ethics, active humility, and silent generosity, advancing more firmly along the invisible paths of soul evolution. Each stage of life, each 7-year cycle, presents a different type of relationship with money. In youth, it may appear as a desire for independence, an impulse to conquer. In maturity, it transforms into the support of projects, the weight of responsibility, and the test of coherence. In old age, if the soul has worked wisely with it, money becomes a symbol of accumulated wisdom, conscious renunciation, and detachment. But if its deeper function has not been understood, it becomes a burden, an obsession, and a symbol of all that remains unresolved. For what truly matters is not how much one possesses, but what kind of awareness one has developed regarding what is possessed. The soul that sees money merely as a means to satisfy immediate desires has not yet grasped its role in biography. But the one who understands it as a force that must be ordered, directed, and purified begins to act as a true spiritual economist of its evolution. This economist does not follow market logic, but the arithmetic of the heart. He knows that not everything given is a loss, nor is everything received a gain. He understands that there are expenses that liberate and savings that enslave, that there are transactions that strengthen the I and others that dissolve it. Every movement of money, no matter how small, leaves a mark on the soul's subtle organism, which will later bear sweet or bitter fruit depending on the intention that guided it. Throughout a biography, money also serves as a node of karmic relationships. Many times, souls destined to meet in this life do so through economic ties, a debt, an inheritance, a business partnership, a salary. All these are carefully arranged scenarios designed for destinies to cross, for old accounts to be settled, and for unfinished tasks from other lives to be resumed. Nothing is random. Every financial transaction is, at its deepest level, a soul encounter. For this reason, the soul must not reject the economic dimension of life as if it were a distraction or a burden. It must embrace it with responsibility, clarity, and courage. Only through concrete incarnation, through the management of dense forces, and through the use of money as an instrument of freedom and service, can the I unfold its full creative potential. Biography is incomplete without economy, and economy is incomprehensible without the soul. Just as an architect designs every detail of a construction so that it fulfills its highest function, so too has the soul, before descending into the world, sketched the master lines of its relationship with money. It has chosen the moments of abundance and scarcity, the relationships that will form around it, and the opportunities that will put it to the test. Now, in incarnate life, the I is called to complete that work, to be faithful to the original plan, to recognize in every financial situation an opportunity to grow, to serve, and to awaken. When the soul reaches this level of understanding, it neither fears money nor chases after it. It sees it as one sees time, a current to be navigated with skill and morality. Then, the soul becomes the artist of its destiny, the administrator of its inner temple, the true economist of its evolution. And so, every coin that passes through its hands, every financial decision, every gesture of giving or withholding ceases to be part of an external drama and becomes an initiatory act, a step toward the fulfillment of the I, a confirmation that spirit can incarnate in matter without being lost. Thus, a human biography lived with awareness can become the most perfect of works. Chapter 5. Crystallized Will. Money as the social etheric body. When the human being is studied from the perspective of spiritual science, it is understood that he is not merely a physical organism, but a totality composed of several invisible members, the etheric body, the astral body, and the I. Each of these envelopes actively participates in life, even though only the physical body is perceptible to the external senses. The etheric body, in particular, is the bearer of life, of the form that renews itself, of the rhythmic continuity that sustains the organism as an expression of a higher impulse. This etheric body also exists beyond the individual, extending into the realm of peoples, cultures, and human institutions. Just as the human etheric body sustains the life of the physical organism, there exists an etheric body of humanity, a living fabric that unites human beings through time, labor, language, memory, and purpose. Within this living body, money is not merely an object or a convention, but a crystallization of will, a frozen expression of the vital flows of the human soul in its interaction with the world. When a human being sets their will into action to transform the world, cultivating the earth, building shelter, teaching an idea, healing a body, they are pouring a part of themselves into the living substance of the world. When this action is recognized by another, it generates an echo, a response, an act of reciprocity. This act is often expressed in the form of money, but what has truly been received is not metal or paper, but a condensed form of recognition for the will that has been exerted. Thus, money becomes a testimony of past will, a crystallization of vital energy that has been poured into the world. In this sense, it can be said that money is the etheric body of human will projected socially. It is not static or dead, even if its form appears so. It flows, transforms, and circulates, just as blood does in the physical body. But its circulation is not biological, it is spiritual. Every act of creation or consumption, of giving or accumulating, imprints a particular vibration onto the social etheric body. These vibrations intertwine, overlap, strengthen, or neutralize each other, generating an invisible web of human relationships that determines the moral tone of an era. Now, if money is crystallized will, then any deformation of money implies a deformation of will. When money is used without awareness, when it becomes an instrument of domination, speculation, or deceit, what is truly being corrupted is the social etheric body, that delicate substance that sustains communal life. The damage is not abstract. Unhealthy forms of money, greed, fraud, unnecessary accumulation, create dead zones in the spiritual fabric of humanity, regions where human will can no longer flow freely, where egoism has crystallized into rigid structures that prevent growth. On the other hand, when money is used with awareness, with moral intention, with openness to others, it becomes a living form, an energy that circulates, strengthens, and nourishes the etheric body of the social world. In these cases, money ceases to be an end in itself and becomes a vehicle for the awakened soul, a mediator of evolution, a bearer of an elevated will. Wherever a human being gives part of their wealth to sustain what is just, beautiful, or true, they are generating etheric currents that heal, harmonize, and awaken. The social etheric body can become ill, just as the human body does, and its principal illness is the petrification of will, the repetition of economic acts without awareness, the circulation of money detached from spirit. This manifests in the mechanization of commerce, in the coldness of financial structures, in the indifference of capital that accumulates without purpose. In such cases, money is no longer crystallized will, but suffocated will, trapped in forms that do not breathe or evolve. Faced with this reality, the human being has a task. It is not enough to earn or spend money. One must awaken to the consciousness of what money represents in the invisible fabric of common life. Every time one gives, they must ask what impulse drives their act. Every time one receives, they must feel what part of themselves has been recognized. And every time one saves, they must know whether they do so out of wisdom or fear. For each of these acts modifies, nourishes, or depletes the etheric body of humanity. It must also be recognized that, in certain individuals, money can acquire an alchemical function. It becomes an instrument of transmutation, turning lower will into higher will. This is when paths open for conscious philanthropy, for the support of spiritual causes, for the creation of new social forms where money does not divide but unites. These individuals, who manage resources with moral vision and spiritual clarity, act as healers of the collective etheric body, as channels through which the will of the higher I manifests in social organization. No biography is exempt from this process. From the humblest worker to the most influential banker, all are embedded in this etheric economy. All contribute to shaping the invisible organism that allows human beings to live in society. And just as a negative thought can sicken the astral body, the misuse of money can poison the etheric body of social life. But likewise, every act of true generosity, every conscious act of financial stewardship, every renunciation offered from the soul strengthens, cleanses, and renews. Money, then, is not merely a means of exchange. It is the mirror of human will crystallized in common life. And the question every human being must ask is not how much they possess, but what moral quality emanates from what they handle. Has their wealth been turned into a living current, a force for good, or has it been left to petrify, to separate from the spirit? When the day comes that humanity recognizes that every coin, every number in an account, every transaction is actually a cell in the living body of humanity, then a new economy will begin to be born. One not based on scarcity or greed, but on the free and conscious circulation of moral will. In that economy, money will once again be what it was in the ancient mysteries, a solar expression of the soul that gives and transforms, a spark of eternity in the flow of time. Chapter 6. The Alchemy of Exchange. Transforming selfishness into reciprocity. At the heart of economic life lies a mystery that, though often ignored by the superficial gaze of the modern world, was clearly perceived by the ancient schools of wisdom. The act of giving and receiving is not merely a social mechanism, but an alchemical operation, a soul transmutation in which, if the forces of the self are correctly directed, they can pass from their lower state, selfishness, to their higher expression, conscious reciprocity. All economic activity presupposes movement. Something is given, something is received, something is transformed. Within this flow, the human being confronts their most elemental nature, the desire to possess, the need to secure sustenance, the temptation to accumulate. These inclinations are not mistakes in themselves. They are part of the soul's organization within incarnation. When the soul descends into the physical world, it must deal with density, limitation, and survival. But if a higher awareness does not awaken within it, these impulses become forces of crystallization, separation, and moral rigidity. Selfishness is the starting point. It should not be denied, but recognized in its most primary form. The soul initially seeks to retain for itself what it considers valuable: food, shelter, security. All of this is, at its root, connected to the instinct for self-preservation. But the destiny of the soul is not to remain at this stage. The soul is called to transcend self-interest and discover in the other a mirror of itself, an extension of its being. And this process begins not coincidentally in the realm of exchange. When a human being offers something to another, whether an object, a service, or knowledge, the possibility arises of stepping beyond oneself, of giving away a fragment of one's will. But in doing so, one does not lose. Rather, one reaches a higher dimension of the self. Reciprocity is not merely a refined form of selfish giving. It is an emanation of the higher self, an impulse that recognizes the other as a legitimate bearer of the spiritual. This mutual recognition is the true foundation of a spiritual economy. It is not the pursuit of personal profit that heals economic life, but the impulse to create a living balance between giving and receiving. Reciprocity is not accounting. It is not mechanical equivalence. It is moral harmony, a rhythmic movement of energies between souls that recognize themselves as part of a whole. The ancient alchemists knew that the transmutation of metals required three elements: raw matter, fire, and conscious will. Likewise, the transmutation of selfishness into reciprocity requires desire, raw matter, the experience of exchange, fire, and awakened consciousness, will. Without these three elements, exchange becomes distorted, turning into manipulation, exploitation, or subjugation. But when they are present, the alchemy of conscious giving takes place, where each transaction ceases to be a mere economic movement and becomes a spiritual act. It is important to understand that this transformation does not occur at the margins of the system, but at its deepest core. Wherever two human beings meet, where one gives and the other receives, a bridge is established, an etheric current, an opportunity for the forces of the soul to elevate themselves. And this opportunity arises thousands of times throughout a lifetime, when buying bread, when paying a salary, when accepting a gift, when helping someone in need. Each of these moments is potentially a chamber of spiritual alchemy. However, for this alchemy to occur, the soul must renounce the utilitarian view of the other. As long as one's neighbor is seen as merely a means to personal ends, true reciprocity cannot exist. Only when the other is recognized as a bearer of the same spiritual principle that dwells within oneself does exchange become creative, redemptive, and life-giving. Then giving becomes a joy, and receiving an act of gratitude. This transformation also has a profound effect on social structures. When reciprocity replaces selfishness as the foundation of exchange, economic relationships begin to organize themselves organically rather than mechanically. No longer is the goal to maximize profit, but to generate equity, balance, and mutual service. No longer is there fear of giving, because it is understood that everything offered returns in another form, at another time, on another level. The soul that practices this alchemy discovers that true value does not lie in what one possesses, but in what one can offer without losing oneself. That abundance does not come from accumulation, but from the living circulation of good. That spiritual wealth is built when the self, instead of closing in on itself, opens up and becomes a channel for others. In this sense, every act of conscious exchange is also an act of self-education for the soul, a practice of freedom, an affirmation of spirit over matter. But this alchemy requires vigilance because Luciferic forces, also infiltrate the act of exchange. Lucifer may tempt the soul to give with arrogance, with a desire for superiority, with a need for recognition. Ahriman, on the other hand, may lead the soul to give mechanically, soullessly, as a routine or calculation. In both cases, the gesture loses its transformative power. Only when giving and receiving are animated by free moral will, by the impulse of fraternity, by the light of the higher self, does the act become a true transmutation. In the coming centuries, humanity is called to reorganize its economy on new foundations. It will not be enough to change systems or laws. What will be necessary is the transformation of the soul of exchange itself, to establish in each human being the awareness that every economic act is a karmic seed, an opportunity for shared evolution. Then, institutions, businesses, and associations will arise that operate not out of self-interest but out of a vocation for service, and money will once again become what it was in ancient times, a living current of loving will, a symbol of giving that does not deplete itself in the act of giving but rises toward the common redemption. The soul that has understood this truth will no longer see the marketplace as a place of competition but as a field of initiation, where each economic encounter is an opportunity to become an alchemist, and in that alchemy, the lead of selfishness is slowly transformed into the gold of fraternity. Chapter 7, The Sacred Triangle. Production, circulation, and consumption as organs of the social organism. Every truly spiritual contemplation of the social world must begin with a fundamental principle. Human society is not a machine, but a living organism. It is not composed of external gears operating under mechanical laws, but of interdependent organs that, just like in the human body, exist in constant and mutual relation, nourishing and sustaining each other in balance. This social organism, like the physical body, can become ill or heal. It can harmonize or corrupt itself depending on the level of consciousness of those who compose it. In the economic sphere, this organism manifests through three essential functions that must not be seen as isolated sectors, but as living organs of a higher whole: production, circulation, and consumption. When these three poles operate in harmony, they allow the social body to breathe, nourish itself, and regenerate. But when one of them dominates, weakens, or becomes autonomous, balance is lost, and social illness begins to manifest in the form of inequality, violence, stagnation, or exploitation. Production is the organ of action, of shaping, of transformation. It expresses human will, which, when interacting with nature, impresses the seal of thought upon matter. Every product, every piece of food, every tool, every work of art is the result of a soul force that has descended into the physical world to become useful, visible, and necessary. Production, therefore, is intimately related to the physical body and human will, but if it is not guided by spiritual knowledge and morality, it can degenerate into blind production, into the exploitation of resources, into the alienation of human labor. Circulation, on the other hand, is the organ of rhythm, exchange, and movement. Just as in the human body, blood carries nutrients from the digestive system to all organs, economic circulation transports goods from the place where they are produced to where they are needed. But circulation must not be understood merely as transportation or commerce. It is also a soul act, an expression of the bond between human beings, a living mediation between giving and receiving. Here, money plays a central role, acting as the bloodstream of the social organism, the carrier of crystallized will, as previously discussed. The third pole is consumption, the organ of social metabolism, where what has been produced is assimilated, transformed, and reabsorbed by the collective body. Consumption is not mere usage, much less destruction. It is a process of internalization, in which the human soul takes from the world what is necessary to fulfill its mission. Consumption that ignores the spiritual dimension becomes voracity, purposeless accumulation, distortion of true needs. But conscious, moderate, moral consumption, guided by the higher self, transforms into an act of gratitude and communion with life. These three organs, production, circulation, and consumption, form a sacred triangle, a ternary rhythm that sustains human existence in its economic dimension. They are not separate entities, but forces that breathe together, that must act in harmony. If one of them hypertrophies or another atrophies, the entire organism suffers. When production occurs without awareness of consumption, the useless accumulates. When consumption happens without understanding what has been produced, gratitude is lost. When circulation moves without knowing the origin and destination of what is exchanged, trade becomes lifeless trafficking. The task of the human soul in this context is to awaken moral consciousness in each of these acts. The worker, the farmer, the artist, the scientist, all are called to produce, not from routine or the desire for profit, but from a will to serve, from an understanding of the true needs of others. The merchant, the administrator, the banker must circulate goods, not as abstract commodities, but as the fruits of another's soul, deserving of respect and a just destiny. And each consumer must learn to choose, to use, to transform, guided by the inner question, does what I take build me or destroy me? Does it strengthen my life or lead it astray? Only when this sacred triangle is lived as such, as the moral structure of the social organism, can a truly human economy begin to flourish, that is, a spiritual economy. Because it is not enough to reform laws or create institutions, true transformation begins in the thinking, feeling and willing of each human being in relation to these three fundamental acts: thinking with truth in production, feeling with beauty in circulation, willing with goodness in consumption. This is the path. In the ancient mysteries, the triangle was a symbol of balance, initiation and perfection. Today, on the threshold of a new humanity, that triangle must be reclaimed at the heart of the economic system, not as a distant ideal but as daily practice. Where production is carried out with love, exchange with justice, and consumption with wisdom, a new form of life is born, a new social body, a community no longer based on the struggle of interests, but on the harmony of purposes. This organism, once fully developed, will not eliminate differences, but will integrate them into a living symphony. Each individual, according to their destiny, will find their place at one of the triangle's vertices, and from there will cooperate with others so that the whole body may grow. Then the human soul will no longer feel separated, exploited or oppressed, but integrated into a common work, a bearer of dignity, meaning, and light. And on that day, the sacred triangle will cease to be a concept and will become the living form of the world, and money, labor, and nourishment will no longer be objects of conflict, but symbols of the renewed covenant between spirit and matter, between self and other, between heaven and earth. Chapter 8. Gold and Christ. The inner path of conscious detachment. Since ancient times, gold has fascinated humanity, as if within its radiance lay a secret that cannot be spoken, a light not of this world. This is not merely vanity or a desire for possession, but an instinctive recognition, deeply rooted in the spiritual memory of humankind. Gold is a solar metal, the earthly symbol of a celestial reality. Its incorruptibility, its permanent brilliance, its resistance to time and destruction make it a mineral image of the eternal. It is no coincidence that gold has been used in temples, crowns, and altars. In the ancient mysteries, gold was considered a terrestrial reflection of cosmic Christic forces, not Christ as a historical figure, but as a universal solar impulse, the spiritual center of the cosmos. Gold, then, was not merely material wealth, but an alchemical symbol of the higher self, of the eternal substance dwelling in the human heart, awaiting awakening, transmutation, and manifestation. But, like every sacred image, gold has been profaned. What was once a symbol of purity in temples became an object of greed in the marketplace. What was once the center of ritual turned into the center of power. Humanity, in its journey toward freedom, had to distance itself from the spiritual world, had to fall into materialism, only to later, through its own will, rediscover the sacred hidden within the profane. This is why gold, like the human soul, has descended from the heavens into the mire, waiting for the moment of its redemption. Today, gold still shines, but no longer as a sign of eternity. It shines as currency for accumulation, as an instrument of dominion. The soul, when untrained in spiritual science, sees in gold a promise of security, power, and permanence. And in this error lies its prison, because nothing external can ensure eternity, and all that is accumulated out of fear breeds slavery. The attachment to gold, and by extension to money, becomes a subtle form of spiritual denial, an idolatry that diverts the soul from its center. Christ and the path of detachment. In the face of this fall, Christ offers a path, not a path of rejecting gold, but of conscious detachment, of moral reintegration of the material into the spiritual. The Christ impulse does not call for contempt for the world, but for its transfiguration. It does not ask human beings to abandon wealth, but to use it without being possessed by it, to administer it as a servant of the soul, not a slave of desire. The living Christ within the soul teaches that true treasure lies where the heart is placed, and if the heart clings to gold out of necessity or fear, freedom is lost. But if gold is received and given with awareness, if it is seen as a vehicle and not as an end, then it becomes redeemed substance, an instrument of light. In this sense, detachment does not mean rejection, but an inner act of liberation, a reconnection with the eternal self. And this detachment is not achieved through external renunciations, but through inner vigilance. The soul must observe itself. What does it feel when it loses money? What emotion arises when it receives it? What thoughts emerge when contemplating it? Here the invisible chains are revealed, and only by facing them, without judgment but with firmness, can the work of liberation begin. Many believe that only those who renounce gold have attained purity. But this is merely an inverted form of attachment, for the soul can also become attached to poverty as a symbol of virtue. And in that case, the shadow remains. True freedom is reached only when neither wealth nor scarcity conditions the movement of the soul, when the higher self can dwell in any circumstance without losing its center, without deviating from its mission. The Christ impulse does not call for lack, but for the transformation of value. Just as he turned water into wine and transformed death into resurrection, so too does he call the soul to turn dead gold into the living substance of love. When gold circulates, animated by love, it ceases to be a burden and becomes a symbol of the resurrected self, a solar force that unites humanity in fraternity. The gold that illuminates. The scriptures say, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." This phrase is not a metaphor but a precise indication of the laws of the soul. The soul gravitates toward what it values. If its value is placed in the external, it disperses. But if its treasure is in the spirit, all external things, including gold, find their rightful place. Thus, the path of detachment is not about renouncing everything, but about reordering values, from the eternal to the temporal, from the higher self to the world. This is profoundly Christic because it demands the conscious sacrifice of the lower for the higher. It is not about rejecting gold, but about offering it, turning it into a channel for good, restoring it to its solar origin. And this is only possible when the soul no longer sees itself as an owner, but as an administrator of the world in the name of the Spirit. The coming trial. In the times ahead, humanity will be tested in its relationship with gold as never before. Great fortunes will move, entire structures will collapse or consolidate, depending on the level of consciousness that animates them. And the soul that has not practiced conscious detachment will be swept away, either by greed or fear. But the soul that has learned to use without possessing, and to give without losing, and to receive without enslaving, will be a column of light in the midst of chaos, a firm center from which a new spiritual economy will be born. For when gold is redeemed in the heart, it no longer blinds but illuminates, it no longer separates but unites, it no longer enslaves but liberates, and in this redeemed gold the face of Christ shines, guiding the soul not toward external renunciation, but toward the inner royalty of one who has overcome the world without destroying it, of one who has inhabited matter without being corrupted, of one who has held gold without being possessed by it. Then and only then gold will return to the temple, not as an idol, but as a symbol of the awakened self, who has made detachment its strength, freedom its treasure, and love its only wealth. Chapter 9. Stolen money, collective karma, usury, and invisible power. In the secret weave of human history, beyond official narratives, beyond accounting records and legal treaties, there unfolds a hidden current, subtle but powerful, that silently determines the course of entire civilizations. The current of stolen money. This money, not earned through just effort nor freely given by will, carries an indelible spiritual mark. Its circulation is not innocent, and its effects are not merely economic, they are karmic, moral, and evolutionary. Just as in the individual plane, each act leaves a mark on the soul's etheric body, on the social plane, every unjust economic action imprints a signal on the etheric body of nations. This signal does not disappear with the passage of time, nor dissolve with reform. It remains latent and active, awaiting the right moment to manifest as historical consequence, as collective destiny, as an inevitable moral adjustment. Because the universe, in its spiritual structure, does not allow any debt to remain unpaid. Stolen money does not refer to visible theft alone. There are more subtle, more dangerous forms of plundering: unjust wages, unfair pricing, profits gained through deceit, exploitation disguised as legal contracts, monopolies that suffocate freedom, manipulation that turns the needy into objects of profit. These are all forms of spiritual usurpation. The soul that executes them, even if protected by human laws, separates itself from the current of truth, and the money received becomes an invisible weight, a moral burden, a bond with adverse entities. Especially grave is the practice of usury, that old form of parasitism disguised as commerce. In it, money is no longer offered as a means of help or productive impulse, but as a trap, a net that ensnares the will of another and subjects it to dependency. Usury does not generate real wealth. It extracts life from the life of others. It vampirizes from the neighbor, weakening freedom. Hence, its karmic effect is deep. The soul that enriches itself through usury not only carries the guilt of its action, but also traps its own destiny in a web of dark power that will, sooner or later, turn against it. Behind these practices moves a force that is not merely human. In the spiritual world, there are entities that do not desire the free evolution of humanity, but rather its decay, its mechanization, its moral dispersion. These entities work especially in the economic realm because they know that whoever controls the flow of money controls much of the rhythm of social life. Thus is established what we might call invisible power, a structure that without a face, name or nation pulls the strings of global finance, not to elevate humanity but to entrap it in the illusion of need, fear, and desire. This invisible power does not reside in specific individuals, although it may manifest through them. Its true seat is in materialistic thinking, hardened feeling, and blind will. It operates where money becomes an end in itself, where the economy separates from ethics, where numbers replace faces. It is there that this adverse force acts, where it plants the seed of collective karma. For stolen money does not only affect the thief and the robbed, it affects the whole. A people that tolerates injustice, normalizes usury, and turns excessive profit into virtue is weaving its own destiny of crisis, loss, and disintegration. And although appearances may suggest otherwise, though the financial reports may show growth, deep down, a spiritual debt accumulates that demands redemption. This debt is not settled by external punishments, but through inner transformation, through free acts of restitution, through moral awakening. Only thus can the process of healing the social body begin, and with it, the liberation of souls trapped in the cycle of theft, debt, and submission. It must also be said that stolen money cannot remain in the hands of the thief without consequences. Though it may appear to multiply, though it may bring power or comfort, on the spiritual plane, it corrodes, weakens, and becomes an obstacle to the full incarnation of the higher self. The soul that possesses it may become shiny on the outside, but empty inside. It becomes incapable of feeling the other, of knowing the truth, of loving. This is its true condemnation, spiritual sterility. Therefore, the only way to redeem stolen money, whether by error, inheritance, or complicity, is through the conscious action of transformative use, through free service. Where ill-gotten wealth is directed toward the common good, where the error is recognized, and the resource is redirected toward noble purposes, the karmic burden begins to dissolve. Not automatically, not without effort, but with certainty, because karma is not punishment but an opportunity for correction, a law of balance that seeks not vengeance but harmony. In the coming times, humanity will face a great decision: to continue feeding the invisible power that rules from the shadows, or to awaken to the spiritual reality of the economy. This awakening will not be the work of governments, laws, or systems. It will be the work of individual souls who, amidst the noise, hear the call of the higher self and begin to act with justice, consciousness, and love. When this inner movement multiplies, when money is no longer stolen but offered, when usury is replaced by cooperation, when invisible power is replaced by the light of embodied spirit, human history will take a new turn. Then what was debt will become gift, what was shadow will become seed, and what was stolen will, through the grace of freedom, become a redeeming act. Only then will the collective soul be able to raise its head and say, "We have learned to use money as an instrument of good, not of fear, of spirit, not of selfishness, of love, not of power." And that day, though invisible to the eyes of the world, will be the brightest of all. Chapter 10. The Destiny of the Poor, Compassion, Justice, and the Evolution of the Soul. When viewed from a merely external perspective, the condition of poverty easily invites simplistic judgment, indifference, or sentimental compassion that does not transform. However, those who have awakened to the realities of the spiritual world know that nothing in human existence is random. Poverty, in its visible form, is not only the lack of material resources. In many cases, it is a profound test, a scene chosen by the soul for the unfolding of certain inner forces. It is a rough exterior that holds within it a core of destiny, of meaning, of revelation. Poverty, when lived with awareness, can become a school of purification. It exposes the soul to the nakedness of the world, to contact with the essential, to the renunciation of the superfluous. In places where the soul cannot rely on the security of possessions, it is called to rely on its inner being. The poor, stripped of life's adornments, directly confront their vulnerability, but also their latent strength. This experience, when lived with dignity and without resentment, strengthens the self. The difference does not lie in the goods one possesses, but in the level of consciousness with which one lives their situation. Poverty is a narrow path where the soul can either rise to great heights or descend into deep abysses. It is like any earthly circumstance, an arena for evolution or fall. From a karmic perspective, there are multiple paths that lead to poverty. In some cases, it is the result of past errors, selfishness, abuses, disregard for others, that must now be balanced through the experience of need. In other cases, it is a conscious choice made by the soul before incarnation, as a means to develop compassion, humility, detachment, or to fulfill a mission amidst difficult conditions. Each case must be observed with reverence, without judgment, without simplification, because behind every impoverished face is a profound soul story, a spiritual drama unfolding. In front of the poor, the awakened soul does not ask, "Why do they have nothing?" but instead, "What can I offer from my being?" And this offering is not limited to material acts, though these may be necessary. True compassion does not consist of giving out of pity, but in recognizing in the other a dignity equal to one's own, a spark from the same divine source. It is the impulse to approach the needy not as a superior, but as a brother, as an opportunity to exercise love that does not humiliate, that does not buy, that does not measure. Spiritual justice does not demand external equality, but inner balance. Not everyone must have the same, but everyone must be able to freely develop their own. For this, social life must ensure that no one is so impoverished that they are reduced to the struggle for survival, nor so enriched that they lose sight of the soul of the other. Extreme poverty, sustained over generations, is a wound in the etheric body of humanity, a sign that the social organism has lost its harmony. Hence, any attempt to heal it from the soul, not only from structures, is an act of collective healing. The poor, when they have lived their path with awareness, develop a wisdom that is not learned in books. They know the value of bread, the weight of silence, the language of a look. Their life is constant prayer, even if they do not know it. Their existence is spiritual resistance, even if they do not name it as such. And many of them, in future lives, will be the bearers of the social forces that regenerate humanity, because what now seems like weaknesses will one day become soul treasures, forces of compassion and justice conquered through pain, lived with nobility. Thus, the task of the soul not called to poverty is not to look at those with less with pity, but with respect, and ask not only, "How can I help?" but also, "What can I learn from this soul, who unknowingly holds the moral balance of the world with its silent existence?" In a higher order, the poor are not the last. They are the invisible guardians of humanity, the hidden pillars that support the edifice of the collective spirit. But it is also necessary to transform the material conditions that perpetuate poverty, as if the issue were simply charity. Occasional charity is not enough. It is necessary to construct an economic life in which access to the means of inner development is not conditioned by external wealth. A truly spiritual society will not be one where everyone possesses the same, but one where no one is so impoverished that their soul cannot blossom. Social justice is not a utopia, it is a moral demand of evolution. Souls that have known poverty with awareness become bearers of a new moral force. They do not seek revenge or mechanical restitution, but active participation in creating a society where every human being from their place can contribute to the common good. In it, a silent wisdom is nurtured, a depth that only constant contact with the essential can provide. And this wisdom, when it meets the active compassion of those who have known abundance, gives birth to a new social fabric of love, real cooperation, and spiritual community. Thus, poverty ceases to be a curse and becomes a call, an initiation, a possibility of redemption, not for the suffering itself, but for the awareness that is awakened by going through it. And in that awakening, the soul rises, strengthens, and transforms, because nothing is in vain, and everything lived with love, and truth becomes strength for the future. The destiny of the poor, then, is not sealed by lack, but opened by the possibility of evolution. They are not the forgotten of the spirit, but its deepest protected ones, its most silent seeds. And when the world begins to see in them not a problem but a path of revelation, then human history will have taken a step toward true fraternity. And that step, though invisible to the external eye, will be the beginning of a new earth, where justice will not be imposed law, but the consequence of mature love, and where each soul, beyond its external condition, will be recognized as what it truly is, a bearer of the eternal light on the path to its own enlightenment. Chapter 11. The Spirit of Giving, Philanthropy, Sacrifice, and Redemption. Giving, when executed from the depths of the soul, is not an act of external detachment, but an emanation of the spirit that has awakened its true nature. It is not simply the transfer of a material good or the relief of a momentary need. It is a sacred action, a conscious offering that, flowing from the higher self, turns the giver into a channel for regenerating forces. This act, in its highest form, is connected to sacrifice, true philanthropy, and ultimately to redemption. In the order of the cosmos, the principle of sacrifice precedes the principle of right. Long before humans invented laws to regulate the distribution of goods, spiritual beings that guide evolution offered parts of themselves so others could develop. The highest spiritual hierarchies trained portions of their substance, of their being, so that worlds, beings, and forms of consciousness could be born. The universe, at its essence, is the result of sublime acts of giving. When the human being begins to give of themselves, of their time, energy, resources, and understanding, they enter into resonance with this higher law of the cosmos, participating in the original harmony. Philanthropy, in its spiritual sense, is not a strategy for prestige or an emergency solution, but an inner vocation, a disposition of the soul that has understood that their wealth, whether much or little, does not belong to them but has been given as a test, an opportunity, a means to serve. Those who give from this consciousness do not expect recognition, return, or personal salvation. They give because their self has awakened to the essential connection with the other, and they can no longer live as an island, but only as a living part of a greater organism. But true giving is not comfortable. It involves renunciation, an interior crucifixion of selfishness, a silent sacrifice of the impulse to retain, and it is here that its redemptive power lies. Because everything done with awakened consciousness does not disappear but transforms, elevates and multiplies in invisible planes. The good given, the bread shared, the coin offered, the timely word, these all become spiritual seeds that germinate where the soul cannot see, but where they will sooner or later return as a blessing. It is important to distinguish between giving out of obligation and giving out of love. The first hardens, weighs down, and demands. The second frees, enlightens, and reorders the soul. Some give large sums without having opened even a millimeter of their hearts, while others, with a simple offering, have ignited a star in another's night. It is not the quantity, but the intention, the vibration, and the purity of the impulse that determines the real value of the act. History is full of souls who, without belonging to any order or wearing any cloak, have practiced the sacred art of giving in silence. Without a name, they have been invisible pillars of the world, upholding just causes, helping the fallen, building bridges over abysses. Their power did not come from their wealth, but from the depth of their giving. They have been and will continue to be the initiates of giving, those who understood that in the act of offering lies the secret of freedom. For giving liberates, detaching the soul from its identification with form, with the object, with the illusion of ownership. Every time a human being gives with love, they break a chain, and every time they withhold out of fear, they forge a new one. Freedom does not consist in possessing without limit, but in being able to give without losing oneself, to use without depending, to share without emptying. It is also necessary to say that true giving does not create dependency, but awakens the other to their dignity. It is not degrading charity, but the recognition that the other is also a bearer of spirit. The one who gives with wisdom does not dominate, manipulate, or turn their gesture into a debt. On the contrary, they elevate, sustain, and inspire. Thus, giving becomes a pedagogical act of the soul, a creation of freedom, an impulse of consciousness. In the end, every conscious act of giving is participation in the mystery of Christ, for he is, above all, the giver. His incarnation was an offering, his life was service, his death was voluntary sacrifice. And every time a soul detaches itself from something valuable for the love of another, it unites with that cosmic impulse that redeems the world from within, not from power, but from offered love. That is why giving is not just generosity. It is a Christic act, a communion with the spiritual center of the universe. In times when selfishness disguises itself as virtue and hoarding is celebrated as wisdom, the soul that dares to give consciously becomes revolutionary, not from protest, but from the silent action that transforms the moral field of the earth. For true giving does not need witnesses. It is enough that it occurs, and the balance of the world tilts a little more toward the light. But this light can only begin from within. The soul must learn to give what cannot be seen: forgiveness, patience, listening, encouragement. These subtle forms of giving are often more difficult than giving a material good. They require presence, vigilance, active compassion. They require the self to yield, the judgment to silence, and love to speak. And in doing so, the soul expands. It transforms into a redeemed world. Giving will no longer be the exception, but the breath. Every human being will give because they have understood that giving is living in fullness, and that the self is only realized when it flows, when it circulates, when it becomes a source. Then there will no longer be a need for laws to regulate philanthropy or institutions to oversee it, because all of humanity will have awakened to free morality, to the wisdom of the heart, to the spirit of giving. And that day, though still distant in time, already lives in the present of every soul that gives without expecting, that offers without calculating, that loves unconditionally. Because in each of these invisible, silent, true acts, the redemption of the world is nurtured, and the gold given with a pure soul becomes light that is never lost, a song that traverses the spheres, a seed of eternity. Chapter 12. Money as a Revealer, Morality, Vocation, and Spiritual Test. Among all the elements that compose earthly existence, money occupies a singular place, not because it is more important than knowledge, beauty, or freedom, but because it acts as a deep revealer of the human being's mood. It is a polished surface where the true intentions of the soul are reflected. Where there is money, the latent morality, the degree of consciousness, the fidelity to vocation, and the spiritual maturity of the one who possesses it, seeks it, or fears it manifest clearly. Money in itself is neutral. It has no morality, no direction, and imposes nothing. But when it comes into contact with a human being, it awakens potential or distorts inner forces, depending on the soul's constitution that faces it. It is like fire. It can consume, it can warm, or it can destroy. Therefore, money is not merely a means of exchange or a symbol of value. It is a constant spiritual test, a presence that demands a conscious stance from the soul. One of the first aspects that money reveals is the living or dormant morality of the individual. There are those who, faced with the possibility of gain, abandon their principles more quickly than they imagined. There are others who remain faithful to what is just, even in extremity. Money, then, acts as a filter for the soul, as a measure of what has truly been conquered in terms of integrity. It is not enough to proclaim values. How one uses money confirms or disproves them. This morality is not limited to big decisions. It manifests in the details: how a price is calculated, how a salary is paid, how a resource is managed. Every economic gesture is a mirror of the soul, and its reflection is not erased in the spiritual world. Every use of money is recorded as an anima impulse that will moderate the individual's future destiny. Therefore, economic morality is not a secondary ethic. It is central to the development of the self, a battlefield where the fidelity to the spirit is decided daily. But beyond revealing morality, money exposes the soul's connection to its vocation, its true inner calling. When this is sincerely heard, it guides the human being toward activities that complete them, that awaken them, that align them with their evolutionary task. However, the pressure of money can divert this course. How many souls have silenced their inner voice for fear of poverty? How many talents have slept because they were considered unprofitable? How many true paths have been abandoned for the promise of economic security? The soul that has awakened its vocation must face the constant dilemma between inner fidelity and external convenience, and it is here that money becomes either a stumbling block or a stepping stone. For when one manages to remain faithful to the task chosen by the higher self, even amid scarcity, an inner strength is reinforced that no capital can buy, the peace of the soul that is coherent with itself. And when vocation is exchanged for money, something breaks, a subtle harmony, a connection with the inner truth, a silent promise made before birth. The vocational path is not necessarily at odds with abundance. Wealth can exist when the soul is faithful. But when money replaces truth, when it becomes the ultimate criterion, the vocation empties itself. It becomes a mask, a commodity, a repetition. Therefore, all true education should teach not only how to find one's vocation, but also how to endure the economic silence that often accompanies it in its beginnings, and to sustain it even when the world does not applaud or remunerate it. Finally, money reveals the spiritual state of the human being, what they do with what they have, how they react when they lose it, what feelings arise at the possibility of gain. The spiritually mature soul is not defined by how much it possesses, but by its attitude toward possession. It may have much or little, but it does not confuse itself with it. It does not feel superior because of abundance or inferior because of lack. It is understood that money is a transient garment, an instrument that should be at the service of the self and not the other way around. This understanding is not achieved overnight. It is the result of prolonged inner work, of constant tests in which the soul must learn to distinguish between real need and illusory desire, between authentic security and attachment, between power and service. Each of these tests is a silent initiation, a ritual without a temple where the soul demonstrates its degree of freedom. In this sense, money can be an ally of the spirit. It can serve to uphold just causes, to create beauty, to heal, to educate, to liberate. But it is only so when it has been purified by consciousness, when it does not command but obeys the awakened self. Otherwise it becomes an idol, a simulacrum, a shadow that usurps the place of the soul. In the future, when humanity has reached a higher understanding of itself, money will not disappear, but it will have transformed into a transparent symbol of conscious moral will. No one will want to possess more than what is necessary to fulfill their task. No one will fear giving, for they will know that the universe responds to generosity with just abundance. No one will seek to buy what can only be obtained through inner growth. And until that day comes, each human being has a choice before them, to use money as a tool of selfishness or as a path of revelation. They can continue asleep, letting themselves be swept along by the current, or they can awaken and begin to use even the smallest coin as an act of freedom. Because in the smallest economic gesture, it is revealed who we are, what we love, what we fear, and where we are headed. And so, coin by coin, act by act, the soul writes not only its external biography, but the invisible score of its spiritual evolution. Where money becomes transparency, vocation, and morality, it begins to shine in the light of the higher self, and then it stops being a test and becomes a path. Chapter 13, The Economic Karma of Nations, People's Debts, and Invisible Pacts. Just as the individual soul goes through successive lives in a pilgrimage of development, trial, and redemption, so too do peoples, cultures, and nations. They are living entities with their own destiny, collective etheric body, moral memory and karma. This is not about symbolic abstractions. Every nation has a group soul, a spiritual identity that goes far beyond the borders drawn on maps. And this collective soul manifests, among other things, in the way the nation relates to money, wealth, giving and receiving. In other words, there exists an economic karma of nations, a hidden thread that regulates the prosperity or poverty of peoples, their historical debts, privileges, and trials. This karma is not written in accounting books, nor is it reduced to GDP figures. It is inscribed in repeated collective actions, in historical decisions, in conquests, in slaveries imposed or accepted, in betrayals and sacrifices, in forced migrations or in unspoken pacts. Every time a people has taken by force what did not belong to them, they have planted a karmic seed that will, sooner or later, sprout. And every time they have generously offered their gifts to the world, they have drawn a current of blessing that will also find its way back. There are nations that, in their current historical stage, enjoy abundance, stability, and financial control. But behind that visible prosperity, deep spiritual debts may hide, wealth obtained through plundering, privileges built upon the misery of others, structures maintained by the imbalance of entire systems. In these cases, what seems like success is, in truth, a deferred moral burden, a pending destiny that will demand adjustments in the future. The universe does not sustain an imbalance that is not redeemed with consciousness. Likewise, there are nations sunk in scarcity, economic chaos, and perpetual indebtedness. At first glance, one might think it is due to political failures, administrative errors, or geographic conditions, but at a deep-root level, there may also be a collective karma manifesting as imposed poverty or as a chosen destiny to awaken specific qualities: humility, resilience, silent wisdom. Some peoples embody poverty not as punishment, but as a spiritual mission, a way to preserve essential values that others have forgotten in comfort. There are also cases where a people, having been victims of plunder, colonization, or slavery, maintain invisible karmic ties of pain and unresolved debt with others. These ties are not severed with diplomatic treaties or speeches, because they are not found on the legal plane, but in the etheric fabric of humanity. They are invisible pacts, embodied memories, bonds that demand not mechanical repair, but deep moral transformation. Until peoples learn to look at the past with truth and compassion, they will continue to reproduce the same conflicts wrapped in new forms. The economic karma of nations also manifests in their way of conceiving work, production, and exchange. Some peoples are born with a commercial vocation, with the ability to unite different worlds through fair exchange. Others carry a cultural or spiritual mission, and their relationship with wealth is more connected to creativity or service. In this sense, each nation has an economic role within the global concert, a place that is neither better nor worse than another, but must be discovered and embraced with consciousness. When a nation betrays its economic mission, when it produces what it does not need or needs what it does not produce, when it exports misery and consumes luxury, when it submits to structures that deny its soul, then it begins to decay from within. And this disintegration is not always noticed immediately. It can take generations, it can disguise itself as progress, but in the invisible realm, the group soul weakens, and moral decay precedes visible ruin. That is why it is so urgent for peoples to awaken, not only politically, but spiritually. They must begin to read their own history with karmic eyes, reviewing the key moments when the soul was sold for security, when gold was preferred over truth, when debt became a form of power or slavery. These moments must be brought to consciousness, not to judge, but to free, because karma can only be transformed when it is understood, and in that understanding, nations can change their destiny. There are ways to redeem collective economic karma. One of them is the conscious sacrifice of certain privileges, the voluntary act of giving more than is demanded, of returning what was not asked for, of helping without imposing. Another way is the creation of transparent and just economic structures that break away from models of dependence and exploitation. But the deepest and most lasting way is the spiritual education of new generations, so they grow not as consumers of the world but as servants of humanity. When a nation acts from this consciousness, its wealth ceases to be a threat or temptation and becomes a blessing for others. Then debts transform into gifts, hidden pacts are freed, and the bonds between peoples rise from convenience to fraternal love. That is humanity's highest destiny, that nations recognize themselves not as competitors, but as organs of the same body, each with its function, its voice, and its sacred task. And just as the individual soul finds freedom in conscious sacrifice, so too will peoples find their redemption when they turn accumulated gold into a living offering for the common good, when they change the logic of domination for that of service, when they discover that the only legitimate power is the one that elevates, and that the only worthy destiny is the one that builds fraternity on truth. Then the economic karma of nations will cease to be a burden and will become a path of collective evolution, a bridge to a spiritual economy where the past is understood, the present is purified, and the future is built with clean hands and awakened hearts. For there is no national redemption without moral consciousness, and there is no moral consciousness without the awakening of the spirit. And that awakening, though silent, will be the beginning of a new history. Chapter 14. The Guardians of the Economic Threshold, Institutions, Banks, and Hidden Forces. In the planes of human becoming, every structure that accumulates power, every nucleus that regulates collective life, becomes a point of spiritual tension, a threshold where the forces of evolutionary advancement confront those of stagnation. Nowhere is this more evident than in the domain of modern economics, where the guardians of the threshold have taken both visible and invisible forms through financial institutions, central banks, global corporations, and faceless entities that govern. These guardians are not merely human figures, they are also spiritual forces that operate behind the material organization of money in the world. In every authentic initiation, the soul must pass through a threshold. There it encounters a guardian, a figure representing all that the soul has repressed, accumulated, feared, or ignored. This guardian is not an enemy, but a test. It can only be overcome by the one who has known themselves, who has purified their intentions, and who can stand in the light even when surrounded by shadow. Likewise, in the evolution of humanity, there exist collective thresholds, and the current economic system is one of them. To access a higher, fairer, and more fraternal social life, humanity must confront, understand, and transcend the entities that guard access to this transformation. The current economic institutions, especially the large international banks, stock exchanges, and supranational financial organizations, are not neutral creations. They were born partly to bring order to the chaos of exchange, to facilitate development, to stabilize. However, over time, as they accumulated more power than they should have had, they became centers of condensed will without soul, channels where human spirit no longer flows, but rather soulless calculation, mechanical repetition, and obedience to forces that do not seek the common good, but domination and control. Behind these structures, adverse spiritual beings act. Though invisible, they feed on fear, desire, greed, and collective unconsciousness. Wherever money becomes absolute, a tool of slavery, these forces operate, darkening human consciousness, separating the individual from their vocation, fostering systems where dignity is subordinated to profitability. These beings do not manifest as monsters, but as dominant thoughts, as seemingly rational economic ideologies, as collective habits no one questions. The human soul, when passively connecting with these institutions without awareness or criticism, submits to their influence. Each bank account, each loan, each investment, each debt is also a soul's signature, an act that binds individual will to a spiritual current. That is why it is not enough to reform laws or change leaders. It is necessary to awaken internally, to see what has been unseen, to discern what operates beyond the contract. At the heart of international banking, for example, it is not only capital that moves. The karma of entire nations is woven, the value of human effort is manipulated, and the fate of generations is decided. And often these decisions are not based on the real life of the men and women who work, create, and suffer, but on financial abstractions, on impassive algorithms, on equations without soul. Thus, the system itself becomes an invisible Goliath, a threshold that blocks the circulation of good, not because it is invincible, but because it has not yet been understood from spiritual consciousness. The question is not whether these institutions are good or bad. The question is, What forces nourish them? What consciousness inhabits them? Do they serve mankind, or do they use it? Do they build freedom, or perpetuate dependence? Each of these questions is a knock at the door of the threshold, because the guardians do not fear violence. They fear truth. And every time a human being observes with moral clarity what was once accepted by custom, a crack opens in the wall of their dominion. These guardians of the economic threshold are also within us. They are our own resistances to change, our fears of losing security, our desire to possess without giving, our comfort in what is established. That is why the battle is not only external, it is also an inner purification, a reconquest of free thinking, pure feeling, and true willing. Only those who have faced their own guardian can question those on the outside without being trapped by their own shadow. In ancient times, wisdom schools taught that gold, to be legitimate, had to be washed in the waters of sacrifice. This meant that every good, before being used, had to undergo moral transmutation, the will to place it in service of the world. Today, the guardians of the economic threshold prevent that purification from occurring. They impose a circulation of money disconnected from the soul. They promote superficial philanthropy, an economy where numbers have replaced faces and where profit has buried purpose. But the human soul is awakening. More and more individuals are questioning the origin of the money they possess, the justice of the structures that administer it, and the possibility of an economy that is not separated from ethics. And in each of these questions, the guardians tremble because they exist only while they are not seen. They govern only while they are not named. They interfere only while there is no light. The goal is not to destroy economic institutions, but to infuse them with spirit, to demand transparency, responsibility, and service, to create new forms that respond to new consciences, to found banks that educate, companies that heal, currencies that liberate, and all of this not through violence, but from the moral clarity that radiates from the awakened self. When enough souls have crossed the threshold, not with weapons but with truth, not with ideologies but with wisdom, the guardians will give way. Not because they have been defeated by force, but because light makes shadows necessary. And then, instead of institutions that control from above, there will emerge living organisms nourished by freedom, fraternity, and dignity. Because the gold of the spirit can only flow when the threshold has been crossed, and the threshold only opens when the soul from its center dares to look at the guardian without fear and says, "I recognize your power, but I no longer need it. I have awakened." And with that word, dead gold becomes alive, the system becomes service, and the economy returns to being a bridge between men, not a wall that separates them. Chapter 15. The New Spiritual Economy, Fraternity, Freedom, and the Future of the Human Soul. Every era of crisis, exhaustion of models, and breakdown of structures heralds, for those who know how to read the signs, the birth of a new form, still invisible, or an infestation in the depths of the collective soul. The current economic system, sustained by competition, accumulation, and the mechanization of desire, has reached a point where it can no longer respond to the true longing of the human being. Moreover, it has stopped nourishing the soul and has begun to dry it out, disorienting it, and disconnecting it from its eternal vocation. But every exhaustion announces a birth, and what today begins to be dimly perceived, still weakly in awakened hearts and scattered yet luminous minds, is the dawn of a new spiritual economy. This economy will not be the result of decrees or external revolutions. It will be born from the soul that has awakened to itself, that has understood that the other is neither an obstacle nor a threat, but a mirror and complement, that has intuited that true abundance is not measured by what one possesses, but by what one can give without depleting oneself. This economy will not function by coercion, but by consciousness. Its law will not be that of blind supply and demand, but that of voluntary fraternity, mutual recognition, and moral will that seeks balance and not advantage. Fraternity is the first pillar of this new form of economic life, not as a sentimental slogan, but as a structural principle. Fraternity means that the need of the other becomes an inner call, that personal wealth is experienced as a resource for the whole, that success is not measured by individual position, but by the health of the social organism. In the new economy, no one will seek to enrich themselves at the expense of others' impoverishment, because they will know that everything separated decays and everything united flourishes. This economic fraternity will entail a profound change in the organization of labor. Work will cease to be a burden, an imposition, or a means of survival, and will become an expression of vocation, an act of creativity, and service to the whole. Every individual will be educated from an early age to discover their talent, their deepest inclination, their inner task. The system will no longer oppress that vocation. It will embrace it, organize it, and connect it with others to form a living and diverse fabric where each person contributes from their essence. Bread will be the fruit of love, not mechanical sweat, and in each product, a spark of the soul that created it will circulate. The second pillar is freedom, but not freedom understood as license or unfettered competition, but as the freedom of the spirit, as the autonomy of the soul to think, decide, and act from the higher self. In this economy, knowledge will be closed. No one can dominate another through ignorance or impose opaque structures. Everything will be clear, understandable, and transparent. Economic decisions will be made not based on the benefit of the few, but from the freedom of the many who think together. The economy will be a space for common creation, not blind obedience. Freedom will also imply the disappearance of economic dogmas, closed systems, and mechanical ideologies. Each community, each culture, each time will generate its own forms, its own rhythms, its own answers, because it will be understood that the economic life is not a machine, but a living organism that must adapt to the consciousness of the soul, and that consciousness in constant evolution demands flexible, creative, living structures. The third pillar is the future of the human soul, because every true economy does not revolve around capital, but around the human being, and the human being is not a consumer, a resource, or a number. They are a bearer of eternity, a pilgrim of the spirit, a center of will, thought, and love. The new economy will serve that future. It will not seek to satisfy fleeting desires, but to create conditions for awakening, for fraternity, for the freedom of the self. This will entail a radical change in the very notion of wealth. The rich will not be those who accumulate, but those who generate, transform, and drive the common good. Money will cease to be the end and will become energy that flows freely, a tool for evolution. Where there is legitimate need, financial structures will be redesigned to ensure the flow of spirit, not the stagnation of greed. Credit will no longer be granted based on material solvency, but on trust in the project, spiritual value, and shared responsibility. In this new economic world, the place of gratitude will also change. Gratitude will no longer be a mere contractual exchange, but an act of mutual recognition. The buyer will thank the creator for their work, and the creator will thank the consumer for sustaining their vocation. There will be reverence in both giving and receiving, and that reverence will not be decorative. It will be the moral force that keeps the economic body alive, prevents its corruption, and binds it permanently to the heart. To reach this new economy, it will not be enough to imagine it. It must be lived, embodied, and built from the ground up. This implies here and now an education of the soul. Every child, every young person must be trained not only in techniques but in spiritual vision. They must learn to think with truth, to feel with beauty, and to will with goodness. They must understand that each coin that passes through their hands is a drop of history, a seed of the future, a symbol of their soul in relation to the world. And every adult must become a guardian of this transformation, not through speeches, but through example, through daily decisions that reveal another logic, the logic of giving without losing oneself, of serving without submitting, of creating without destroying, because the soul that has awakened to the spiritual meaning of the economy can no longer live as before. Its mere presence radiates a new vibration that cracks old structures and announces the dawn of another world. That world will not be perfect. It will have mistakes, transitions, and contradictions, but it will be authentic because it will be born of consciousness and not imposition. And in that world, the human soul will finally be able to walk on earth without betraying itself, look at others without competing, and work without ceasing to love. Then, the economy will cease to be a problem and become a spiritual path. It will cease to be an obstacle and will become a temple, and each act of purchase, each salary, each entrepreneurship will be a silent ritual in which the spirit expresses, offers, and regenerates itself. This is the future that awaits. It is not imposed by heaven nor guaranteed by chance. It is built by the human soul day by day, coin by coin, decision after decision. And when that future comes, it will not be announced with trumpets but with a simple gesture. A hand that gives without fear, another that receives with gratitude, and a heart that knows that both are part of the same evolving soul.